My grandfather, Petrus Mahler, which is how Mullye is pronounced in Flemish, was born in 1885 in Roseslare, Belgium. And he was born to a family. His father's name was Ludovicus Mahler, and his mother's name was Aldefina Leruth. And they had a factory that they had attached to their house. Then their business was they bleached flax to make linen, because this is in the Flanders area of Belgium, which is the upper part, which is the Dutch-speaking, and I think the lower is called Walloon or something like that, and that's the French-speaking. So anyway, the area that they were from was well known for the linens that they produced, and the families, I think both families, Leruth and Mullye, were in that business, because so not only did they do business together, they married together, it sounds like. Anyway, so Petrus was born 1885. I'm assuming he probably as a kid worked in this factory, but just like many, immigrants, looked like there was opportunity in America, and plus he had 14 other mouths to feed. So he came to America on the ship, the Kroonland, and sailed from Antwerp on August 6th, 1910. And it was actually, I think, a 10-day trip. He arrived in New York Harbor on August the 16th, 1910. And I guess I don't have the evidence exactly, but he was probably processed through Ellis Island. And on the manifest, it showed him as being a single white male, unmarried, and his description as his occupation was laborer. But I believe I know he had tool and die skills like many Europeans had, because in subsequent documents it shows him as being a machinist. He worked for the REO Motor Company and other places, and I'm sure he was, wrenching on things. And actually in 2000 there was a reunion of Mulleys in Roseslare, and I went to Europe for the first and only time, and that was an amazing experience. But one of the people I met his name was Edgar, and Edgar was probably like a third or fourth cousin of my father's. And one of the questions, we had a great conversation, but one of the questions he asked me was, why did Petrus come to the United States? And I don't have anything in writing to say one way or the other, but as I explained, he had a lot of, like many many families with a lot of kids, and he probably felt like, he wasn't going to have any opportunity there, and America was the land of opportunity. And he had, I believe, two brothers that had already, one at least, but maybe two brothers that had come to the United States. And so he, with, good health apparently and skills, decided that that's why he came to this country. And the experience is just amazing to us, because you think about, his mom probably didn't even go with him to Antwerp to get on the boat. He said, "Goodbye, Mom." I'm knowing that, and I don't know for sure if he ever did go back to Belgium or ever see his mother alive again, but that's just how things worked back then. And that's really something to stop and think about, because, we scab our knee and we have a big issue about it. And these people were going through all kinds of stuff that we can't even imagine. So anyway, he arrived here in 1910. He went to Chicago, I'm pretty sure, because that on a manifest says that was his destination, or where he had intended to go after he got off the boat. And he had a brother there, I believe he had a brother Herbert and a brother Joseph I believe those are the two that are in the States. He came there was one other Mullye that I saw on the manifest, Henry, and I didn't see that in the name of, that wasn't his brother. I don't think it might have been his cousin. And I don't know for sure. I just, that was the information that I had to work with. From 1910 to 1913, I'm not sure what was going on. I don't have any documents or anything, but I assume that he arrived in Chicago, just trying to figure out, which end is up for a little while. And then worked his way up into Michigan, into the Jackson Mason area. Because in 1915, he married Blanche Huffine. and Blanche was 18 years old, and Petrus was 29 years old. So there's a really tantalizing, maybe never discovered story about how that happened and why. But at that time, he was living on 222 Barnes Avenue. So I have their actual marriage certificate or license, and let's see. Yeah, he was working. I believe he was working at the REO Motor Company, and that's he worked for REO. He worked for Wythe Labs in Mason, which originally started. They eventually became like the large baby food manufacturer, and so he worked for them. I know he was there in 1921 because I have a company newspaper that has a picture, a company newspaper from 1945 that shows a history section, and there's a picture of a group of workers, and Petrus is in it. I mean, geez, I had so much luck trying to find stuff on this guy. So they were married in 15. In 1919, they had their first child, which was Beatrice, which is my aunt. And in 1920, Petrus got his was naturalized as a citizen. So he was here for at that time you had to be in this country for 5 years to be eligible, but he had waited 10 years, and I'm guessing that he had this child, and so probably he felt like he needed to be a citizen, and maybe but it kind of makes some sense. So he was a tool and die maker, and we don't have a lot of artifacts, but this is one of my favorite objects on the planet at the moment. This is his hammer. My dad told me that this was Petrus's hammer, and so that's what I'm going by. And it really represents like, here's a man who worked with his hands, and you can see from the end of the hammer, it's been hit at least 10 million times to get it peened over like that. So we keep that close. On December 8th, 1929, my father, Louis Mullye, was born. And then 2 years later, Petrus died. So I never knew my grandfather. In fact, here we're sitting almost 95 years after his death. But the experience of being asked to do this interview has really, I've been in the last few days really in touch with Petrus. And, it's fascinating to think about his story, and how I'm sitting here because of the choices that he made. His father's name was Ludovicus, which is Louis in English. My father's name was Louis. My middle name is Louis. So it's still only recently, they'll seem like obvious things, but here I am almost 60, I'm 68 years old, and I'm starting to put the puzzle together after all this time. So thank you for letting me do that. So he died of cancer on May 26, 1931. They were living near Jackson, and at that time he was working for the Pittsburgh Forgers Company, which actually was headquartered in Jackson. He's buried at St. John's Catholic Cemetery in Jackson, Michigan, and that's about all I know about Petrus. But everybody's an immigrant, and that's my immigrant story. And he was just, he was a Belgium instead of Latino, but that's how I got here. And 3 generations later from he coming, it's hard to imagine how little money he must have had when he came across and landed in New York City. And, just looking at the prospects that he might have had, how in just 3 generations this could happen. He was here, my dad worked, some self-employed, but he worked for General Motors, so he made a good blue-collar living, and we never had a lot of money, but we always were living comfortably. And then I've been fairly successful at what I do, and just, that story is, that's my story, and I'm proud of it. I think there's something in people's DNA that sort of predisposes them towards certain things. I didn't think about my grandpa, and I mean, my dad taught me a lot of stuff about building and fixing cars, and he tore apart engines and put them back together in our garage and that kind of thing. So certainly, that I had that hands-on experience, but also that's what he learned from his father, and his father, who knows how many generations back, they've been working with their hands. So, yeah, these are hands of a muley, and I guess that's what they do is pound nails. Everyone knows who's dug into family history. You're just digging, you're just looking for little pieces and parts, and sometimes you luck out and you get an item or a document or something that opens your mind and opens your eyes to something that you didn't know about your ancestors. And what I have here are a set of cutlery. So this is a spoon and a fork that actually was made for the wedding of Ludovicus and Aldefina. So Ludovicus Mullye, Mahler, and Aldefina Leruth were married, I think it was around the 1870s. And this is cutlery that was made specifically for their wedding. Then they gave it to Paul and Marie Mahler. So Paul would have been my great uncle. Paul was Petrus's brother. And they probably were married in the late 1800s or something, early 1900s. And they received these as a gift, and that they actually were involved with, they were government employees or something, and the two of them traveled or worked in the Democratic Republic of the Congo when Belgium was it was a colony of Belgium, I think. Anyway, so these went with them there, and they came back, and then I was able to contact Marie. Paul had died long ago, and about 10 years ago I was in contact with Marie, and she said she had these, and since she was an in-law, she felt like they belonged in the hands of a muley, and she sent them to me, or I received them through a common friend, and it's blows your mind, I think. Just think about the fact that they were on that table back over 100 years ago, 150 years ago or something, and they're in my hands now, and they're handmade, and they have their initials on the tabs, and so they're a priceless family heirloom for sure. We don't use them for regular meals, that's for sure. Okay. So this is Petrus's a document of naturalization, and in 1920, like I was saying, he was naturalized as a citizen of the United States, and that I think is actually the photograph of him. I don't know when it was taken. I believe it was an early photograph, so it doesn't necessarily the day he got his naturalization, but I'm sure he was pretty proud, like most immigrants are, of getting the document and being officially a citizen of the United States. I want to add that, and even if this doesn't get in the final cut, I still like to speak the name of Eugene Caton. So when Petrus died in 1931, Blanche, my grandmother, had a 2-year-old son and a 10-year-old daughter, and in 1931 her prospects for being able to finance a life for these guys wasn't really that robust, being a woman and being single and having 2 kids. And so typically widows, I think, would try to find a suitable spouse to sort of help them along the way. This is my blood grandfather that I never knew. He's been dead 95 years. I was born 25 years after he died. This is my grandfather, Eugene Caton, my step-grandfather, but he married Blanche probably in the early 30s, soon after Petrus died. He was a friend of the family. They weren't in love. I have some letters, and it wasn't a love affair or anything like that, but it was when it started. But it was a warm, wonderful relationship that developed and carried on. So I'm not sure, I don't know much about his past, where he came from. I do know he was in World War I. He suffered an injury. He was the smartest guy I knew. He built his first tractor. He had an 80-acre farm on Barnes Road in Mason, which the farm is kind of still, the building is still there, but it's been divided up and stuff. So I just wanted to mention that. You know, we really pay a lot of attention to our blood relatives, but, you know, along the way, there's a lot of people that we may not be necessarily blood related to, but they're still family.